I am Elad Amin, and what I'm about to disclose might be difficult for many to accept. Let me be perfectly clear. This isn't about choosing sides, it's simply the honest retelling of my own experience. I served as a soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces. My duties were the center of my existence. Discipline wasn't just a requirement, it was my very way of life. Every morning, as I donned my uniform, I didn't merely feel like a soldier, I felt like a guardian standing for my people. As a Jew, my faith was one of the cornerstones that grounded me while I fulfilled my responsibilities. I truly believed that God was by my side. In moments when I feared I might become a martyr, I found comfort in the thought that my mission was sacred. Yet life does not always conform to our beliefs. What unfolded on September 24, 2024, shattered everything I had ever known. That day began like any other. The orders were unambiguous, no room for questions. My commander ordered me to shoot a group of people suspected of collaborating with the enemy, women included. Doubting the command was simply not my role. That's the way military life works. Orders are followed without hesitation. I lifted my rifle and took aim at the target. My finger rested on the trigger, my breathing steady as I awaited the decisive moment. My heart pounded unusually fast, but I chalked it up to adrenaline. In just a second, I was supposed to pull the trigger. But that moment never came. A bullet struck my shoulder, sending me crashing to the ground. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Pain radiated through my body as I struggled not so much to survive as to remain conscious. Yet I couldn't hold on. My eyes grew heavy. Then the world faded to darkness, and silence enveloped me. And in that silence, something extraordinary occurred. I felt myself begin to separate from my body. It was as if I were hovering above the battlefield, silently observing the chaos below. I could hear distant screams and the sound of gunfire like echoes from a fading dream. Amid the turmoil, I sensed my soul being drawn toward a dark tunnel. The tunnel was shadowed, yet it evoked no fear, only a profound, peaceful quiet. Somehow I knew that something awaited me at the end of that path. With each step, I felt increasingly detached from both my body and my past. The war and its suffering receded, as if I had finally escaped all the turmoil, but I was mistaken. This was only the beginning. When I emerged from that dark passage, I found myself in an entirely different place. At first it appeared to be a realm of tranquility. As I opened my eyes, a breathtaking vista unfolded before me, a majestic city bathed in a warm golden light. Its streets were flawless, its architecture elegant and captivating. People smiled and conversed happily. I thought surely this must be heaven. I accepted that I had died and that this was my reward. As I wandered through the city, the atmosphere enchanted me even more. The air was light and fragrant, stirring memories of my happiest childhood moments. Birds sang in gentle, soothing melodies, and a comforting warmth filled my heart, dispelling all fear. I believed I had finally found peace, until the illusion began to unravel. At first the changes were subtle, nearly imperceptible. A strange chill started to creep into the air. The sweet aromas faded away, replaced by a hint of decay. The cheerful birdsong was silenced, giving way to eerie whispers and murmurs. Smiles disappeared from faces, replaced by expressions of cold detachment. The golden glow dimmed, and the once pristine stone structures began to crack. I had no choice but to keep moving, as if there were no path back. The city transformed into a labyrinth, its wide boulevards narrowing into claustrophobic corridors with no exit. As I advanced, my clothes seemed to vanish bit by bit, leaving me exposed and utterly defenseless with nothing to protect me. It slowly dawned on me that this city was nothing more than an illusion. I had believed I was in heaven, but now I realized it was a trap. My steps, inexplicably, led me ever deeper into its maze. Eventually the light nearly vanished. I was pulled into a cold, dark, and oppressive space, until finally I found myself at the edge of a cliff. The ground beneath me trembled as if it were about to swallow me whole. Then, I felt an irresistible force dragging me downward. This was no sanctuary of peace, this was hell. When my fall finally ended, it felt as though I had collided with a terrain entirely alien to the world I once knew. Flames consumed everything in sight. A reddish light surged upward from beneath, flooding every corner, and even the air itself burned with an intense heat. Breathing felt excruciating, as though my lungs were stuffed with burning coals. All around, deafening screams reverberated, emanating from men, women, the young, the elderly, from every nation and creed. Everyone writhed in unspeakable agony. Some were engulfed in unending flames, while others were forced to carry enormous stones without reprieve. There were those who were savaged by clawed beasts, and others who were repeatedly hurled into deep wells that resounded with an endless void. As I scanned the chaos, familiar faces began to emerge. The first I recognized was Amir, an old comrade from my soldier days. He was bent over under an immense burden, his knees buckling, yet he never released the load. I couldn't bring myself to believe he had come to this. In desperation I shouted, "Amir!" But my cry was lost in the clamor. For a brief moment he paused and turned toward me. His eyes were vacant. I could see the depth of his suffering, yet he did not acknowledge me. Then my gaze was drawn to a group of people gathered in a circle amid the flames. Among them was an Israeli politician whose speeches I had once admired on television. Now, however, his face was so horribly charred that he was nearly unrecognizable. As he screamed in torment, those around him hurled stones at his burning form. Our eyes met, and in that fleeting instant I realized that everyone here was now paying for the consequences of their earthly actions. Looking around further, I saw more familiar faces. Enemies I had once despised and friends I had once held dear now standing side by side. Here there was no room for hostility. All were equal, all bound by the same relentless torment. In one shadowed corner, I spotted another soldier clad in an Israeli Defense Forces uniform. Yet he was not alone. Soldiers from the opposing side were also present. As I moved closer to one of them, I didn't even need to see his face to know who he was. It was Yossi, someone I had worked with on previous operations. He was chained to a pole at his chest, the metal biting into his flesh as if it were tearing him apart. Yossi's face was a mask of fear, regret, and utter helplessness. I longed to call out to him, but the words lodged in my throat. Every sight inflicted deep, soul-wrenching wounds. It was as if I could absorb their pain. What was the meaning of being here? Why were these souls suffering so intensely? And more disturbingly, what punishment awaited me? I soon realized I did not wish to uncover the answers. Yet there was no escape. The agony here was eternal, and this was only the beginning. I could not flee the harrowing scenes that surrounded me. Tormented cries rose from every corner as individuals bore the full weight of their misdeeds. Still, the most terrifying aspect of this suffering was not merely the physical pain. Here, souls were being torn asunder, crushed beneath the burden of their own errors. And now, it was my turn. Abruptly, all sound around me fell silent. Though the flames continued to burn, their roar was swallowed by a profound void. Gradually, shapes began to emerge from the mist ahead. The first figure I made out was that of a child. He appeared to be about 8 or 9 years old, his eyes wide and his face marked by an innocent sorrow. I recognized him immediately. This was the same child I had seen during an operation in Gaza, a child who had clung desperately to his mother, weeping as we evacuated the area. I knew at the time that he posed no threat, yet I obeyed orders and pulled the trigger. That child now stood before me, locking his gaze with mine. "Why did you kill me?" he demanded, his voice reverberating into every corner. Tears streamed down my face, yet no words could escape me. Seeking forgiveness felt futile. His very presence testified that I was unworthy of it. Then, more figures emerged, each one a mirror reflecting my errors. I recalled the day I mistakenly ended the life of an innocent farmer during an operation. In this place, the notion of an accident held no meaning. That man stood before me, his eyes laden with judgment, a silent indictment of the wrong choices and blind obedience that had led me here. One by one, they confronted me. But it wasn't solely the faces of my victims that I saw. I was forced to meet my own fears and frailties as well. The fleeting guilt I once felt for disregarding innocent lives during my missions was no longer a mere shadow. It had taken on a palpable form. As they advanced toward me, the last shards of hope within me shattered. In that crushing moment, I began to hear confessions. My confessions. A voice, as if ripped from within me yet not entirely my own, declared, "I killed them." I had followed orders without question. I took lives because I was too afraid to challenge what I was told. I allowed myself to devalue human life because submission was simpler. Every word cut into my soul like a sharp blade. I knew then that escape was impossible. In the depths of this hell, there was no hope. It felt as if the darkness was devouring me, and with every passing moment I shrank further. The weight of my mistakes was so crushing that I began to crumble beneath it, unable to even hear my own voice. The only thought that persisted was that I would remain trapped in this torment forever. Just when I believed all was lost, the suffocating darkness of hell suddenly fell silent. The scream ceased, the flames receded, and for a brief instant it felt as though the entire world held its breath. Then a light appeared. At first it was a mere flicker, but steadily it grew in intensity. This light pierced through the oppressive darkness and blinded me with its purity. It was so immaculate, so filled with peace that I instinctively raised my hands in a futile attempt to shield myself. And then, from within that light, a figure emerged, tall, serene, and yet radiating an undeniable strength. It walked toward me at a measured pace. As it drew near, I could make out its face. It was Jesus. I don't know how I knew, but every fiber of my being affirmed his identity. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice little more than a broken echo. He regarded me in silence for a moment before speaking. His eyes seemed to embrace all my pain and mistakes, yet they offered no judgment. "You have forgotten peace," he said, his tone soft yet imbued with power, a message that struck straight to the core of my soul. "I was just doing my duty," I managed to mutter, though the words caught in my throat. I had only been following orders. "When you disregard the sanctity of life, you lose the true meaning of peace," he replied. "But being here wasn't about meting out punishment, it was meant to bring understanding." In that instant, something within me broke apart. My pride, my terror of disobedience, my selfishness, all were exposed. I had always convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. Yet there, standing before him, I realized I could no longer deceive myself. "What must I do?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Forgive. Forgive yourself and others. Choose peace." His words lit a spark inside me. Amid the flames that had once consumed my soul, that spark shone like an eternal light. I began to deeply reflect on the innocent lives I had taken, the orders I had followed, and my blind loyalty to war, none of which had ever brought peace. For the first time I felt a profound change within my soul. Guided by Jesus, I started to unearth the goodness hidden within me. For the first time ever, I earnestly sought meaning, and I realized that meaning wasn't to be found in war. It was in peace. Suddenly I came to, as if a cold wind had struck my face. My eyes slowly opened, and the harsh sunlight stung them. I discovered I was being carried on a stretcher. The battlefield's explosions still echoed in my ears, though now they were distant and muted. A burning sensation flared in my shoulder where the bullet had struck, but that physical pain paled in comparison to the searing burn within my soul. I lay there staring at the sky, lost in thought about all I had just experienced. Hell, torment, confessions, and Jesus. It all felt so real that it was impossible to believe it was merely a dream. The fear, the agony, the words I had heard continued to resonate deep inside me. As I was carried along, I contemplated my life, my beliefs, and my actions. How many lives had I disregarded in the name of duty? How many innocents had I slain? Were these acts truly in line with the values I once cherished, or had I simply succumbed to blind obedience? At one point, one of the soldiers hauling the stretcher leaned close and said, "You'll be fine, lad, hold on." Yet his words sounded like a fading echo. I realized I was no longer in the world I once knew, but in an entirely different reality. Everything I believed about life and faith had shifted. The duties I once embraced with pride now felt like a crushing burden. Something inside me was unraveling. What I had always considered right no longer appeared so clear. Lying there on the battlefield, I made a decision. I had to change my life. I had to choose peace. This ordeal had given me a second chance, and I couldn't waste it. In the days that followed in the hospital, the visions never left me. The dark corridors of hell, the relentless torment, the haunting faces, and that brilliant light. Jesus' words continued to echo in my head. Choose peace. I lay silently in my bed for days, deep in reflection. Until that moment, I had devoted my entire existence to unquestioning obedience, believing that duty was my sole purpose. But now, that purpose had shattered. I no longer knew where to find true meaning, yet I was determined to search for it. For the first time, I questioned, whom do I serve? Am I truly doing what's right? I had no answers, only the resolve to seek them. Even the act of questioning began to transform me. One morning, as I gazed out the window, an overwhelming feeling surfaced, a deep, aching need for forgiveness. I had been burdened by the weight of all my errors, and I refused to live with that constant load any longer. I realized that to forgive myself, I needed to completely overhaul my life. I felt compelled to devote my soul to God. Years of war had stoked anger and fear within me, and now I longed to uncover the true meaning of peace. After I was discharged from the hospital, I distanced myself from my old comrades. I understood that I no longer belonged in that world. I sought a path far removed from the trappings of weapons and warfare. Thus, my spiritual journey began. I wasn't going to squander the second chance that God had granted me. I resolved to redefine myself as an advocate for peace and a messenger of love. Yet I knew the road ahead would not be easy. My past clung to me like a shadow. To atone for the sins I had committed, I first had to transform myself entirely. Once I left the hospital, nothing remained as it once was. The military uniform I had once worn with pride now felt like a crushing burden, a reminder that I could no longer deceive myself. I could not continue living that life. Announcing my decision to officially leave the military was a daunting challenge. My friends and commanders were shocked. Some lauded my courage while others branded me a coward. Their opinions no longer mattered, though. I had to follow that inner light, that message Jesus had given me. Facing my past mistakes was excruciating. Each night I questioned myself and prayed for forgiveness. I could not erase the memory of the innocence I had taken, the pain I had inflicted, or the blind obedience that had led me astray. Yet I also knew I couldn't continue bearing that weight. I had to change if I ever hoped to be forgiven. So I chose a new path. I was no longer a defender of war but a proponent of peace. I embarked on a spiritual quest, reaching out to others to teach them about love, forgiveness, and peace. The first steps were fraught with challenges. People knew my past. Some asked, "Does a killer really have the right to speak about peace?" And they were right. The scars of my past were undeniable. Yet, it was precisely that past which fueled my new journey. With every choice I made, I redefined who I was. I began to believe that love and understanding could rebuild the world that war had ravaged. Once, I had lived in a realm of hatred and fear. Now, I strive to illuminate that darkness. This journey isn't an end, but a new beginning. With every step I take to defend peace, I leave behind more of my past mistakes. At last I have discovered what is right. I have chosen love and forgiveness.